What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to Redonkulous Gaming, and I'm here testing Vengeance Demon Hunter with Necrolords. We're going to be taking a look at Fodder to the Flame, which is the Covenant ability granted to Demon Hunters. And what this does is, I will go ahead and use it now just to show it off. It calls an ad, and the goal is to kill this ad while everything else is up so that it dies and you stand in the pool of blood and it gives you a buff. And this buff is going to increase your throughput and give you a little bit more damage, and it's also going to give you 10% mitigation. And so timing for this is really key in terms of making this thing work seamlessly. Now, the other thing that I'm running is Spirit of the Darkness as a legendary effect. And I chose Spirit of the Darkness because of the frequency in which I am casting Sigil of Flame, because it inherently will buff my Fiery brand, which will then in turn buff the amount of healing that I'm doing. So the more Sigil of Flames I get down, the more damage I do in between cooldowns for Sigil of Flame, the more healing I will get when I cast Fiery Brand again. So the goal is, in between each Fiery Brand, I'm getting as many Sigil of Flames out as possible and doing as much damage as possible. Now, I am not running Fracture because I'm really trying to push the viability and see how well Demon Hunters are doing with Leech, especially now that Fell Devastation is baseline. And when you cast Fell Devastation, you go into Demon form, and it gives you 25% Leech, which obviously is a crazy amount of Leech and a lot of self-healing. So in order to effectively use this setup, you're going to need to really truly use Fiery Brand as a defensive spell. A lot of people are tempted to use it offensively, and while that is tempting, I'm going to use it here. I'm going to go ahead and use it as often as I can defensively to make sure that I am buffing the amount of healing I'm getting from it every time I use it. Now, as always, I'm really looking to answer 3 questions. The first of which is, how does the Covenant ability feel? Is it something that is enjoyable to press and play? Or is it something that just completely interrupts the rotation, makes it feel choppy? You know, really, to shorten it, is this a fun ability? Is it a fun ability to play? The next thing is, how strong is the ability? And is it ultimately something that is viable? So those being the last 2 questions we look to answer. And after doing a number of dungeon runs with these abilities, I have a pretty good handle on really all 3, but I'll talk through them as we go. So we're just going to clean up this room here before we pull the boss. Got a couple of ads left. Oh, didn't mean to jump over there. Lost my mouse for a second. We got to get this ad on the side just because they will come. And one of the things I will say, if you haven't watched any of the other Demon Hunter videos I have up right now, where I explore each of the 4 covenants, is that it feels great to have Fell Devastation baseline, and then with the level squish, and then being talented into Soul Rending instead of Fracture, I'm enjoying the overall healing that I'm getting with 5% baseline Leech. Where this is likely going to be an issue is higher level content, where you need to rely a little bit more on having your Fractured Souls on demand to make sure that you're getting the healing required. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call my my little buff dude here, and I have to make sure that he dies in a place where I can effectively just stand still for the rest of this fight as much as possible so I can take advantage of the buff. My healer just went down because he stood in this frontal cone here. But that's okay, because we are Demon Hunter. Go ahead and meta. He's at about 50%. And I've still got my buff. So I'm going to take advantage. Get all these ads with Fell Devastation. I'm going to have him spit this way. I'm going to jump back in. We should be able to make it as long as everyone else survives. And you cannot control where he does that frontal. He's going to turn, and he's going to target someone, and he's going to spit all over him. So you're going to want to move away, as you can see. Now my positioning could be better. In the middle of the room would give them a bit more room. But if they stand on either side, they would be fine. To kind of alternate and switch between. So my Firebrand is almost up. I haven't really needed the extra healing though. And we've got our first boss down. So the one thing that I noticed immediately to answer the how does it feel question, or start to answer it, is that I really enjoy having an extra mob that I'm challenging and I'm fighting in order to get a buff. What feels bad about it so far, and through some of the testing that I've done to this point, is that you have to effectively make sure that that mob is dying in a place that you can use it 100% of the time that the pool of blood is up that gives you the buff. If you're not able to do that, and especially on fights that are going to require high amounts of movement, it's not going to be very fun to summon your mob and then have to move away from the pool of blood. Got my Fell Devastation going. Blew those up. I'm going to get this guy. Bring him over here. I'm going to consume magic throughout too. Something you should absolutely be doing as often as possible. I took a hit there, and so I got my Firebrand up and healed myself right away. I'm going to call my extra friend here. Looks like the group got some extra blobs. That's okay. Get a hold of them. I'm going to meta. Help out the healer. Get my leech up to 25%. And I have taunted this thing a couple of times, and it's just not falling off. There we go. Okay, do a little bit of kiting. And unfortunately, I was able to get him to die right where I needed him to, but that was a lot of movement, and I purposely was not targeting that mob so that I could still actually get the buff. So there's my Fell Devastation. Again, baseline, no longer a talent, which gives me that 10% mitigation plus the damage buff. I'm going to try the best I can to keep the dungeon moving in terms of chain pulling. Basically until the healer complains. My interrupts on cooldown there. Now this is a pug group. Which is pretty typical considering it's beta. And you can actually use these barrels to blow up mobs. So I'm going to pull these right here. And it looks like they got the blobs, so we're going to bring them all over here. And we're going to try to get as many in there as possible to blow those up. You don't want to be standing in there, but if you can get that on a mob, it's very helpful. Looks like they're chain pulling on their own. I'm going to go ahead and meta. Try to save the group here. Able to get almost everything. I'm rooted, so I'm not able to leap and save them. Got to root back here. Help out the healer. Pop a healing potion. Jump out of that. And now I'm back to kiting. And I have gone down. So that was 3 pulls in 1. A couple of people not paying attention. We'll just run back and we'll get going again. If you take a look at my spells for that last fight, you can see, well, Details is not cooperating with me, but you can see what my damage table is for each pull right over here on my Details where it says my spells. In case you're wondering, I'm going to go ahead and use Fiery Brand. Get Immolation Aura off. And we'll stomp around here so that we boost Fiery Brand. So again, that's a legendary effect. Not anything that's baseline. I chose my legendary effect kind of based on the Covenant's gaps and weaknesses. And while this Covenant brings extra damage and a little bit of extra mitigation, 10%, it's only for a small period of time. And it is contingent on killing a mob in the right place. So all that being said, I wanted to bring a little extra healing to one of my primary mitigation cooldowns, Fiery Brand, which is why I chose it. I'll go ahead and make this bigger while we're waiting for the group to run back so you can see how this works. So each enemy hit by my Sigil of Flame increases the instant damage of my next Fiery Brand by 15%, stacking up to 15 times. And then Fodder to the Flame, as we wait for our healer, is where you call an extra mob, so you commission a duel, you kill that demon, and you get extra attack speed by 20%. For the duration of the blood pool, and 10% extra mitigation. We got our healer back, so we'll jump right back into it. Now the other thing you get with Necrolords is Fleshcraft, and it synergizes actually pretty darn well with the Covenant ability, because after you kill the mob that you're dueling for the buff, if you cast Fleshcraft in the area that it died, it's going to increase the overall shield amount that you would get because Fleshcraft treats that mob as an elite. And elites, or special mobs, will grant you a higher baseline shield. The shield itself will grant 20% baseline if there's nothing around, and up to 50% with a strong enemy in place. So if you were to channel Fleshcraft after a boss, which you'll see me do coming up here in a little bit, it'll give you an automatic 50% shield. Now that thing lasts quite a bit of time, so it's pretty darn useful. Let's get out of this. Those hurt. This one's the boss, but we're not going to fight him here. He's going to duck away here in a second. Then those guys blow up, and they kind of just run around and fixate until they stop to die. So we got to get the Blight Weaver down. This is exactly the same model as the boss, and the boss will operate in very similar fashion. Okay, so you're going to want to clear the room here, or at least these first two platforms. You really should be clearing everything because the boss bounces around from platform to platform. I'm going to go ahead and get Fell Devastation going. Enjoy that extra leash. I'll let him hop away here in a second. Right to the platform we were just at. And they pulled the boss. So we're going to have to just go into the boss. We're going to get a lot of extra heads here. So this is going to be incredibly sloppy. But we'll do what we can with it. So he's going to hop around quite a bit. The group needs to help control these slimes. And he's going to call out different slimes throughout. I will try to remember to Fleshcraft if we get him down here. But as you can see, we're going to get all these extra mobs. And the Hunter's Pet's going to pull them. There we go. I'm going to go ahead and meta. We'll get control over these guys. I'm going to let them deal with the boss while I handle the mobs. And at least get control over them. Hopefully we won't get the third platform involved here. This is why you need to clear the room ahead of time. And we're just going to go down here again. Unfortunate, but kind of the realities of pugging. I'm going to let the group know what's going on. So we're back on track here. We had another ninja pull, but we're gonna muscle through it. And ultimately, I think what Blizzard can do, despite the fact that this Fodder to the Flame ability, so what I'm casting now, I have to fight this Doomguard, and I get the buff. I think what they can do to fix this ability and make it worthwhile and a viable Covenant choice is, instead of standing in the pool of blood like I am now to get the buff, if all you have to do is step in it once, and you get to carry the buff for a minute, or for 30 seconds, or whatever the predetermined amount of time is, I think that would be something that would really make this Covenant much more appealing for a Demon Hunter. Because as of right now, and given the fact that the Demon Hunter is intended to be a mobile class, as of right now, it does not, it's not very cohesive with the rest of the Demon Hunter toolkit. Simply because you move around a lot in dungeons and in raids, and generally where you defeat the champion that you face is not where you're going to be standing for the duration of a fight. And so I say all of that just to say that this is a relatively easy fix if they turn this into step in the pool, get a buff, carry the buff for 30 seconds or for 1 minute. But as of right now, the ability's fun, but I don't think it's strong enough. And I don't think the ability has the strength required in order to be viable in all content. Especially if you're doing raids or dungeons and you're forced to move. The pool's big enough, but it's not big enough to account for a boss fight like what you just saw. And that feels bad as a Demon Hunter to have to say, well, I'm just going to have to stand in this pool in order to get my buff. So I see, it's more beneficial for the group to live than it is for me to get my 10% mitigation buff and my extra 20% damage. Let's see if they leave that alone. So as of right now, despite the fact that you get Fleshcraft, which I've barely used and I need to, despite the fact that you get Fleshcraft as a baseline mitigation skill, it's not enough to offset. The shield is not enough. Doesn't do enough to make Necrolords feel like a viable pick at this point. But again, easy fix. Should Blizzard do this and allow for, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to call my champion here, or my demon, because I'm going to use Fleshcraft right after this so that we can get the buff up, because these next two trash pulls are rather annoying. So there we go, I got Fleshcraft. And because I killed an elite enemy, it synergizes, as I mentioned. It gives me roughly 35% shield for my total health pool. Now this web is a little goofy, and you might be sitting here watching and saying, why'd you just get webbed there? It's because you can still hit things while you're in it. And if I don't actively hit these, they turn aggro on the rest of the team. So I'm purposely staying in on the web, even though it seems counterintuitive to do so. I'm hoping this is something that Blizzard ends up changing, because otherwise tanks are just going to sit and get webbed and get rooted. But that just might be the way that they intended it to work. Okay, we got one more group, and then we're going to head into boss. I'm going to save my meta, but I'm going to blow my Fell Devastation here, just to make sure I keep these guys. I think that if Demon Hunters did not have Fell Devastation as baseline at this point, they would feel a little lacking in terms of what their toolkit offers. They would still be heavily reliant on their ability to heal based off of, Fracture. And it would be great to see the viability of, more leech and self-healing end up being kind of more of the de facto spec going forward. It really frees up some of your skills and makes them feel a little bit different with Fell Devastation in the mix. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and we're going to get boss. I'm going to try to call my mob here soon. Pop Demo, and we're going to get him down as fast as possible. There we go. So I've got my buff up. We're going to have the boss call some stealth ads, and we have to go and unstealth them in order to get them out of stealth. So that's what I'm going to do now. And this is mostly the job of the range, otherwise I end up pulling them all around the room. There we go. Looks like we got all but maybe one currently. I'm going to use my Fiery Brand. Give me a little extra healing here. Sigil of Flame. And double up on it. Okay. Almost had Fell Devastation back up. I think it was up, I just didn't have what I needed to get it casted. So close. Either way, that boss is done. And we're going to be on to the next one here. Looks like we got a ring off of that. Go ahead and get it equipped. So there's just a couple pulls left now to the last boss, and actually before I go down there, I'm going to go ahead and get my Fleshcraft from my elite mob and my boss, and that's going to bring me up, as you can see, to a 50% shield. That's going to absorb 19k. The other shield, by comparison, the other two that I've done were about 11k. And these things are a pain in the butt because they mostly need to be kited. They cannot be tanked. But what I am going to do, as soon as they activate, is I'm going to group them all together. And we're going to get Fell Devastation on them. I'm going to call my mob here, and I'm going to kite it back. just to make sure that I live as it gets kited towards me. Okay, I'm actually going to leave that up. And we're going to go to the next pack. So you don't want to be in melee range of these. Doesn't feel good. I've still got my mob up. I left her up for good reason. It's mainly so I can live right here. As these things start to hurt. Let's get her down. If they were to reach me. Now we gotta get this guy to take his percentage damage, and then he'll teleport to the next pack that we need to do that to. And again, I lose my buff despite the fact that it's still up, because I'm not directly in it. And that's something that makes a very fun ability not fun to deal with. Something that could be very unique and very fun feels a little clunky when you don't get to take advantage of the buff that it's intended to give you. So again, really hoping that Blizzard makes that buff something that becomes, you know, a 30-second tick after you step in the demon's blood, and that'll ultimately give it more viability across a lot of different types of content. Okay, rinse and repeat. You don't want to step in that water, or any of this water for that matter, to give it something to compare to. If you're currently doing live and you've faced off against Shadhar, the water that will kill you if you stand in it for more than 5 seconds, this is very comparable to that, even during the boss fight here in the middle. So you don't want to get hit by it, or even stand in it even a little bit. Okay, so we're about to get the boss. Pops up here in the middle. You're going to want to stay out of the way of her tentacles, and then you're going to have to face an ad throughout the fight. So first thing I'm going to do, of course, is I'm going to call my challenger. I'm going to go ahead and meta Fell Devastation to get my pool of blood down. So I get my buff. Here's the ad. It's going to do a circle. Touch of slime. Going to eat it while I'm in meta, and I'm leeching like crazy. The group needs to not focus on the boss, and they need to actually help get this guy down, or he starts to hit pretty hard. Luckily, this is just a normal. And then from here, it's just a dance where you just stay out of the way of tentacles. They'll come up in a different pattern, and you just move around. It gives you enough time. Even if you're running slower, you're a slower class, you don't have high mobility, there's more than enough time to get out of the way. And she's back up, and you rinse and repeat. We're going to get an ad here soon. There it is. We're going to need to absorb this touch of slime. I'm going to eat it again. We got tentacles. And it looks like our healer is about out of mana. But we should have enough just to get through this last piece here. There we go. The boss is at 30%. So we'll go ahead and burn. Should get another ad here soon. No, we've got tentacles this time. It's my fault. And there we go. All done. I'd like to say that run was painless, but that would be a lie. But just to kind of recap, a couple of ideas here and ways to make this much more viable for Demon Hunter tanks. First and foremost, very fun ability. It's crazy fun to be able to call a mob, Fodder in the Flame, like this, and get my buff. It's also really cool that it synergizes with Fleshcraft and allows a larger absorb shield. So here's my buff. right here. Attack speed increased by 20%, plus my 10% mitigation. Fleshcraft is baseline 20%, plus this mob brings me up to roughly a close to a 50% buff, actually. So that's really nice that you have that synergy between those two skills. You got Fleshcraft on a 2-minute cooldown, and you got Fodder to the Flame on a 2-minute cooldown. So it goes hand in hand there. They feed off each other really nicely. But overall, it takes a very fun ability, and it makes it a little mundane when you are stuck to just a very arbitrary small circle. So what could be a relatively strong and fun ability becomes relatively weak anytime you have high movement, which is more often than not. So I question the overall viability of this skill across raid and PvE content, and especially PvP. I don't see the value there. There's a whole lot of movement in PvP, so not sure that you're going to be eating everything that you're hoping for if you end up going with the Necrolords Covenant as a demon hunter for vengeance, or really even havoc. Let me know your thoughts. If I got something wrong or you disagree, let me know. If you feel like I may have forgotten something, also let me know.